Well, folks, it was 25 years ago today. Not exactly, but more or less. Last month was December, the 25th anniversary of recording this album, The Sign of Four. And now it was released probably a couple months later. I don't have the exact date, but it's kind of an historic moment in improvised music because it meant the meeting of guitarists Pat Metheny and Derek Bailey. And we're going to talk about that today and how Paul WERTICO and I played percussion on that and how I ended up producing this album and all that good stuff. And I'm joined by two of my best buds from MakeWeridMusic, Andre Cholmondeley and Anthony Garone, who's the founder of said site. And he is a maniac when it comes to finding different kinds of weird music. So I thought it would be fun if they interviewed me on my own damn show. And maybe we'll get some information out of me that I didn't remember or some other way. Instead of me just doing a monologue, this will be more fun. And I always have fun when I'm with these guys. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I am going to, I'm going to use your tactics from Todd Rundgren. You know, what you asked Todd applies to you as well. First of all, why commit so hard to this type of effort? We're not talking about a one CD thing. We're talking 3 CDs that are nearly impossible to listen to. Okay? 3 discs where you're searching for something that sounds like one of these guys, except for Derek Bailey. You know, it all sounds like Derek, but if you know any of the other guys, where are they? Obviously, they're playing. Why did you commit so hard to a 3 CD release of such difficult music?
Well, let me just answer that in the short by saying it was not originally intended to be a triple CD. So when I take you through the little story and tales of how we got to do this thing, that'll really explain a lot. But no, initially it was to be one disc that combined the studio and the live recordings. That was the original agreement. But as you know, things can become spontaneous and can kind of take over and become a little bit obsessive. I don't know if Anthony knows anything about that, but I'm saying that certain people can be a little obsessive. And when 2 or 3 of them get together in a room, then it can really go down a rabbit hole. And that, I would say, would be the short answer. But basically what happened was I originally was playing duets with Derek Bailey for about 10 years. He was really one of the first people I played with when I came on the downtown scene in '83. I jammed with people like John Zorn, Tim Byrne, and Bill Frisell and Derek Bailey. And so I was a youngin', I was 20, I think. And Derek was really cool. You know, I like to tell this story because it's so indicative of Derek and how game he was to try things. Is, you know, this 20-year-old kid comes up to him in the basement of the Saint. Everybody who knows the downtown scene might remember the Saint on East 6th, I think it was, or East 7th. And it's a basement, and there's Derek Bailey playing with John Zorn and George Lewis. And I was there with the other 14 people, and we were listening to them play music from their now classic recording called Yankees. Well, they weren't playing that music, they were playing different music. And I had some cojones. I was listening to a lot of Derek Bailey. In fact, that record that many of your guitar fans might know is a record called Guitar Solos, which was a compilation disc of odd guitar solos that included Hans Reichel, Fred Frith, Derek's on there. You guys could probably remember who the other guys are, right? Volume 1, Volume 2, maybe? And I heard that and I thought, oh, I like this. This is really weird. And I'd been doing free improv in my high school bands. You know, my bands included free improvisation as early as probably junior year in high school. So when I found out that Derek then had a percussionist named Jamie Muir, who was in this band I like called King Crimson, then I thought, oh, this is interesting. There's there's ways of using different levels of craziness in structure, in outside of structure, in song structure, you know, because Jamie was in music improvisation company with Derek. And then he went from music improvisation company to King Crimson, Lark's Tongues and Aspic. So I was sort of enamored of that whole idea of, we don't know what this is. I mean, it's kind of liberating for a young guy. Where I had hard ass teachers, you know, and they were like, oh, I don't know what that is. I don't know what this, oh, brain salad surgery. That's a horrible name, you know, things like that. And so I was always drawn, you know, to the more bizarre stuff. So by the time I get to college, I'm practicing to play with Cecil Taylor and I'm practicing to play with Derek Bailey. There's no other way to put it. Those were my goals. Now, I didn't know that it meant that Derek Bailey would make it easy for me. So I went up to him at the Saint that evening, and I said, Mr. Bailey, I'm a very big fan of your work. I'd really love to play with you sometime. And his response was, how's tomorrow? You pick me up, get me an amp, and we'll go play wherever you want. I swear it was that simple. And I have in my archive, I have the cassettes that are really good stereo, clean recordings of the first time that Derek and I played together. So we built a relationship right away from rhythm, right away from texture. He's really keyed into all that stuff that Todd talked about that are like the non-harmonic or melodic aspects of music. Things like dynamics, things like rhythm, things like texture, things like timbre. And I'm a percussionist. And I see all these records that Derek Bailey's playing with percussionists. He likes percussionists. Well, here's another one. So we hit it off. He called me for things. I went to London to play with him. Multiple company events. We played with Roscoe Mitchell of the Art Ensemble in Chicago. We played with, Wadada Leo Smith in New York at the Knitting Factory. All these different company events were Derek's events. So I knew that Derek was open. And I knew that Pat was pretty open. And WERTICO and I had a duo called Bang. And I had my new record with Derek called Banter. I gave a copy to Pat at a Pat Metheny group concert. And he flipped out. He said, oh my God, I love Derek Bailey. And I'm like, you love Derek Bailey? Oh, I've been following Derek Bailey since the 70s.
There's no way anyone listening to Pat, even at that time, unless you saw him do his free improv stuff on stage, which was pretty rare, I don't think there's any way you could tell that Pat is a Derek Bailey fan.
But nobody likes a surprise better than the Bendian. So I was just delighted because I'm like, oh, because you listen to every fucking ECM record, dog. I know.
Yeah. And
I know
Ornette, and yeah.
And Ornette, I know. And then the moment of truth came, and I said, Pat, how do you know Derek Bailey's work? And this is the answer, and I swear this is verbatim. When I got serious about guitar, I decided it was my job to know about every guitarist that I possibly could.
That's it. And he said that many times in interviews. But yeah, but I think that he's coming from Ornette, and he's clearly knew Interstellar Space and Ohm, and that's what's interesting. And he surely knew Sonny Chirac, that we should mention in the thread here. But yeah, that must have been such a surprise, right? Your jaw dropped, no matter what you knew later about Pat at that moment, huh?
Well, and it's not just knowing about Derek. He didn't say, "Oh, I know Derek. Oh, I know what Derek does." He said, "I love Derek," right? That is totally different. And it's one thing to like read about someone in a magazine. It's another thing to study their work. And yet it's one more level above that to enjoy this type of music. So I feel
but is that, sorry, I was going to say, is that the first artist though that you've encountered? Because I think that's pretty normative. Like you talk to some pop artists and I like hip hop, or, some African guitarist who goes, I'm a big fan of country music,
or the Beatles being into Stockhausen.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
not
but
saying like he had no right. It's just
no.
when someone says something like when I got serious about the instrument, I had to learn about every player. Learning about every player of significance is one thing,
Sure.
but Derek is pretty far out on the fringe, and to be invested in that type of work when you're hearing what Metheny's doing during this time, you know, in the 80s, it's just not it's
Yeah.
not
That's what I was going to get to the core of. Like, are you talking about his output? But then you listen to something like As Falls Wichita. That's one of the weirdest 20 minutes or 12 minutes, right? Of playing that blind for students. People will leave the room. They're like, when does it go to a melody? Or, you know,
Well,
but your point well taken on the hits of Pat and on the main magazine cover image of Pat. That's what's interesting. You're right. He's at that point he's known as, you know, kind of nice Brazilian stuff and kind of quieter. But really, anyone who scratches just slightly under the surface, there's a lot of weirdness by the mid '80s. There's Song X and there's
Off Ramp.
Yeah, there's but not debating you, Anthony. You're right. For most people, it's like, wait a minute, how's he? Wait a minute, you know,
this is the Bright Size Life guy, right?
Right, and you're correct in that record and Zero Tolerance. A lot of people, you know, from his larger fan base, were like, "What is going on?" You know, yeah.
So, what else can I tell you? I mean, it was really a matter of, as soon as he said that, I said, well, we should have dinner sometime. And he said, we should play. And I said, yeah, that would be, you know, I'll bring that up to Derek, you know, because the other thing is I didn't know that Derek knew who Pat Metheny was. He'd be just the sort of guy that wouldn't. But I think he knows stuff. So I go to him and he goes, oh, really? Yeah. Sure, that sounds great. So it was easy to put together because everybody knew it was going to be like, the structure of Limitations is always fun for me. So the idea is like, what do you got? You got 2 guitars and you got 2 percussion. Like the bar talk, 2 piano, 2 percussion. Like just like something goes off in my brain where I always find antecedents. Like how do things? So then it was, Pat, you're going to bring all your fucking guitars, right? He's like, what do you think? Right? So he brings all, and I go up to him for every one, and I go, can you play that one? Can you play that one? He had one where the bridge changed the tensions on the strings to do different tunings on a Les Paul mechanism. So, I mean, there was that. There was the Picasso guitar. And Derek showed up with his acoustic and his hollow body electric, and he asked for a Fender Twin. Pat was playing in quad on stage. 2 speakers in front of him, 2 speakers behind him. So I was behind Pat. His speakers were hitting me directly. I could barely hear myself because he was so loud. And then Derek turned up, and then you get the whole first disc. So
okay, but that's history, right?
Right.
This is not what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about 3 CDs, each of which have their own emblems, you know, like custom designed. And this is something I love about your CD packages, Greg. You care about the visual, the art, the look, and the feel and everything. I mean, this is no simple package. I don't know of any. When I first got this, I was like, what the heck? This 3 CDs? This is going to be crazy. And each disc has its own logo, and then each disc is based on a Sherlock Holmes story. So it's kind of like, what is going on here? When I say, how did you commit so much to this? It's not just, why is there 3 CDs, but this is like an art project that went 3 miles, you know, further than scoped, and it was like a 500-yard walk, you know.
I have to admit, as I have in the past, that sometimes I go a little overboard. But like, this meant a lot to me, this logo, because I just thought this is what it is. It's 4 guys reaching for, you know, the heights of music, you know, we're headed up. And just things like that meant a lot. Plus, I'm a huge Conan Doyle guy. Jeremy Brett is my Sherlock Holmes. To my British listeners, I hope you respect that. Jeremy Brett is my Sherlock Holmes. And when I saw where they shot Baker Street, that's the same neighborhood that Derek lived in. Like Derek's house was one of those walk-ups. So when I would go to Derek's home in London, it was like going up the stairs to the Baker Street apartments Mrs. Hudson kept for Holmes and for Watson. And so it was already in my mind, like The Sign of Four, which is such a great adventure of Sherlock Holmes, and the Derek connection, and just having fun with the book and opening up and finding really cool titles like The Aurora or Antecedents, A Break in the Chain, Tracks, Strange Story. And it was fun because all these Pat really liked. I remember like some of them he just thought were so great, like Poisoned Arrows, you know. And and how do you name instrumental pieces anyway, you know? So that became sort of just fun of finding a way to get the listener in, you know, on Untidy Habits was almost a reference to Frank, you know, like Filthy Habits. So I had free reign. I mean, Pat said, "You're producing this." I was choosing the takes. I was choosing the sequence. I was choosing we worked on the mix together. But since we're jumping around a bit, let me just go a little bit back and just say that our man Andre was an audience participant in the live performances, and he is recorded on the album. Andre, you were there for the red disc. Come for the red hour. It's for my Star Trek fans. Andre, was it a red hour? I mean, what the hell was it? Because I was just on stage. I could barely hear what was going on.
It was very red. It was very red. And let me start out by presenting one of the. It's funny, and the youngins watching need to understand. There was a time where we didn't get a picture of everything, and I know you know that if you're young. I'm being facetious. And many people did have cameras, and our dear friend Bob Ramos is to thank because he was there with me. And we'll get this a better scan. But as Gregg just described, there he is behind the amps. There's Gregg in the back there, young Gregg. There he is. Quite Elias looking, actually. But there's young Gregg. This is a very rare picture. And then this one here. So I was there, standing about this perspective, right? Because we were there.
Could you hear Derek?
I could, yeah, and we moved around, you know. And I'll say a couple quick things about the Knitting Factory, which, wow, my life and the Knitting Factory, I just don't even know. The 15 years of going there, playing there. And I'll say to Anthony, too, and to any listeners, Anthony raises a great point of how radical it is to do a beautiful package with 3 records and 3 CDs. One thing people need to realize is the aesthetic of the Knitting Factory was, and I bought my copy there. You would walk into the Knitting Factory and you'd go early because you just knew. Because there was 3 rooms. There was always some free show in one of the floors. And it was first come, first serve. So you'd go early. You'd grab a beer. And there was a record store, Knitting Factory Records. And behind the bartender, you had dozens of these records. And it would be everyone that Gregg just mentioned. The new Zorn record, the new Tim Byrne, the new Frizzell, the new David Torn, you know, some weird poetry reading with Laurie Anderson, or, you know, all these people, Wadada, you know, Pharoah Sanders would play there. And their records would come out on Knitting Factory, a lot of them, or other small labels. So that was the thing. People were buying weird records like this, like that, like with their pint. So that's part of the aesthetic to remember, that there was a huge market for it. Downtown Records, which is still there. So that's just a little background. I came into this, I was about 14, and a friend of mine, who I always thank, played me 2 records, a live Stanley Clarke record, I Want to Play for You. I was about 14 in high school. And Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed. And I always thank Dave Orbach for that, because here I am. I can see his teenage room. We're smoking some pot. And so I've always loved completely noise, abrasive, whatever you want to call it. And then I got into things like Diamant de Galache and Shriekback and Musique Concrète, Throbbing Gristle. And another major point that people should go back to from a pretty mainstream artist in the weird world, Frank Zappa's Weasels Ripped My Flesh. It ends with this, God, a minute of, and I loved it. I thought, because you listen to it and you can hear little things, little granules of sound are moving around in the noise. So I always had a relationship with noise. Jump ahead to this show. I'm a big fan of all four people at that point. Actually, Gregg, I only knew a little bit. I'd seen his name, and WERTICO I only knew from the Pat records. But I knew Pat and Bailey, so I had to be there. I think I might have been at 2 shows. And as Gregg says, I'm at the end of the record screaming Derek's name and Pat's name. But it was a life changer because it showed me it was a pretty good crowd. So it showed me that, okay, there are weirdos who like this music. It was really loud. I remember that. But as a rock and roll fan, as a heavy metal fan, the volume was fine for me. I mean, it was just that language. I'd never seen that much equipment on stage with 4 people. I mean, it was more than I'd seen the Pat Metheny group at that point a few times. It was close to that much gear. And he would have.
I can't fit everything either. I fit a vibraphone back there. It's crazy.
Amazing. But I do remember just really being affected by it for a long time. And then, to my shock, to my surprise, it became an album. That really was, because you just didn't expect that. The record...
That's a good point, though, because no one spoke to the audience, which I thought was really weird. There were no talk mics. So we come on stage, we play this noise, we leave. And by the way, we're making a record. Nobody knew we were making a record. Then we went into the studio and recorded. Then we came back and played live again. I think it was like that broken up. And yeah, to your point, it was just we didn't even really know what it was.
It was an onslaught, and I think at that time I'd seen Last Exit. I'd seen Sonny Chirac a few times. I think I'd seen the son of Last Exit sax player Peter Brotzman. I'd seen his son Casper Brotzman. Wow, I still think about that show. You want to talk about
the guitarist, yeah.
Whew. Anthony, do you know that record he did with Paige Hamilton from Helmet? That's a good one for our scholars to go look for. Yeah, so Casper Brotzman, son of Peter Brotzman from Last Exit, did a record with the incredible Paige Hamilton of Helmet, and it is just a wall of it's a test for but I remember it well. It affected me for years, that record. And when I had a experimental group with my late partner Sherry Josney, electronic percussionist, we did who was at the show too, we on our first record we have a track called Bailing Out. That's kind of a little nod to Derek. So he was that important, his whole thing. And of the 4 people on stage, in a way he's what stands out in that it was so unexpected. Like, you'd see Paul and Gregg was playing around town, Pat was doing it, but to see Derek in a group, I remember distinctly. I remember, wow, this is weird. This is the guy who plays solo. What this is going to be weird. So those are some of the memories. I'll close by saying I still listen to it from time to time. It's been a while, but every couple of years, you put it on. The controlled aspect of the studio version, I always wish and hope that gets another audience, because that's where you really can hear all the 4 voices. The live album are really it's kind of like, I'm a big Hot Pepper fan. That's the Ghost Pepper, Scorpion Pepper stuff. The live records.
It really is, man. It really is.
And you got to be into some Throbbing Gristle to fall asleep to, and some Diamant de Galache and old Yoko if you're gonna really approach some of that stuff.
So I was gonna pull out some press from back in the day, contemporaneous reactions, but I'll tell you one from memory. Here's the review from the Boston Phoenix. this music is a big, ugly blood clot. Boston Phoenix. Now,
last night I played my wife the Residents version of Teddy Bear from The King and I, and they did a live version. That's what I showed her. It's terrifying, right? It's just like the stuff of nightmares. That to me is accessible. Like I can listen to that, but I think that performance is as far from my wife as the Sign of 4 is for me. And people are like, "Oh, you run Make Weird Music." That doesn't mean I like everything that we post.
Nor do you have to.
Right. It's just so out there, and you have to appreciate that there's something that people just in general don't understand yet, or if they ever will, and that's what was happening on these discs for sure.
I remember Pat saying, "We don't know what we're doing. We don't, in the best sense, like we don't know really what this is. We're responding to each other." I know that there are different sorts of aesthetics at play. Mine was I would always try to change my setup for every piece, so I'd limit my vocabulary for every piece. So that's not something that the other three guys did. So unless that was sort of a group decision, it mainly, the contrast came from, Derek, are you going to play acoustic on this one when we're in the studio? Pat, what are you going to play? So there were guitar combinations that then I could play bass marimba, or I could play chromatic boobams, or, so there was a lot more control of variety in the studio than there was live. Live was sort of a bloodletting. And it has its moments of contrast. In fact, I do point to the last In Quest for a Solution, the last track, where Pat uses his lead synth sound that we all love and know so well, while Derek and other people are playing kind of percolating percussive things. And so it does reach a moment of two worlds that are different, but a lot of what Sign of 4 is Pat finding his place in Derek's world. And I think if we understand it from that point of view, then it's useful to think of it that way. And I think more of Pat going over to Derek's side than Derek going over to Pat's side. But Pat knew that going in, and that's what he wanted. As to just quickly address the 3-disc situation, that was Pat. And he wanted it to be a blockbuster. But I felt that it should be all the best of the 3 discs could be boiled down to 70-something minutes on 1 disc. But he wanted this disc first. I couldn't talk him out of it. And then we figured we'd do the acoustic and studio 1 second. And then we figured, well, there's sort of the balance of everything. So I called it the balance of probability. On the third, every disc had a subtitle. So to try to organize it in some way was my job as a producer. I think that it kind of got knocked off track a little bit by starting with The Wall of Noise, because a lot of people won't go to the second and third disc after that. So Pat and I, had a friendly disagreement about that, and everything else that I wanted was happening. I mean, I was getting all the tracks on, and he said, but no, it's got to be the first time we played on stage, which is disc 1, and then it's going to be just the studio stuff, and then just another disc of live stuff. And I said, okay. And then the phone call to the Knitting Factory was interesting, because the contract had to be renegotiated because the budget changed. So this was that kind of thing, of that spontaneity, and also Pat's intensity. When he gets an idea, he's just like a dog with a bone. He's just like really, really grabbing onto it and running with it. And I think maybe he knew this is a once in a lifetime thing to play with Derek, and he wanted to try as many different things as he could. The thing about improvised music is not that different from what I learned from Weather Report through working with Bob Belden. Is those Weather Report records are great, but they took off all the stuff that wasn't happening, and they edited them down to the stuff that was happening. Quote, Joe Zawinul says to Bob Belden when they were doing the live and unreleased double, which was originally supposed to be a box set, but Sony chickened out at that time. He said, Belden, take off all the shit that's not happening.
That is a quote and a half.
Isn't that great? That's
But
beautiful.
that's what Tio Macero did on the Miles stuff. It's what producers
know?
do in instrumental music.
Well,
Where-
not just instrumental music. Good
Well-
producers, this is what they either turn something not happening into something that's happening, or they tell you to cut.
I
But,
think there
Greg,
was
I got to get going. This was a
Right
great
on, man.
discussion. Thanks so much for inviting me. And I know this thing's out of print, but there are ways to hear it if you need to hear it. So if you're interested in an adventure, check this out. And we did make a whole video about this album. Or not a whole video, but it's part of our, what is that? The
Pat.
sign. Yeah, the Pat Zero Tolerance for Silence video on Make Weird Music.
it's
So-
actually WTF Pat Metheny Noise Rock.
I
believe.
think that's the
I
title
love
of the
it.
video.
Yeah.
And my ears and eyes are bleeding in the thumbnail.
Yes.
So.
Right.
Yes.
That's,
All right, guys. Thanks so
And
much.
by the way, Anthony, I knew the record was not for everyone, and I've never changed my position on that. So I'm happy to look at both sides.
I'm happy that you can see it that way as someone who produced it, because I think there are a lot of artists who are like, I made this. This is great. You should like this, you know?
Exactly.
But I showed up
And-
in,
yeah.
I showed up in Texas the year that it came out, and there were kids coming up to me at this college and saying, "Hey man, the Sign of Four is so cool." I'm like, I'm glad you think so.
Yeah. You look. Yeah. No, that's a whole other discussion. We should do one that's just about noise and Merzbow and all these things.